Blood, guts, fingers and toes. Blood, guts, fingers and toes. Blood, guts, fingers and toes. Sit in front row at the podcast show.
All right, Professor.
I'm laughing. Hey, what are you trying to murder me? No, only cut your truck. No, only cut your truck. No, only cut your truck. Only cut your truck. Only cut your truck. No, only cut your truck.
Welcome, everybody, to the road to Shangri-La, an International ICP Podcast. You're here with me, DJ BO. No stops, no caps, no brags, just facts. And I'm here with dirty hair Dan Fitztastic. How are you doing, sir?
Life's getting easy. We didn't get hit by Tropical Storm Gonzalo, so my house is still here, so that's a good start.
Well, It's great to see you again for episode 3 of our podcast. This is episode 3 where we'll be talking about the Ringmaster, the second Joker card in the ICP deck. And of course, for those of you who do not know, this is an intersectional, international, Insane CIown Podcast, a peripatetic, psychopathic podcast. It's whoop whoop from around the world. And today, Dirty Hair Dan Fitztastic and I are joined by someone who goes by many titles. He's a husband, a brother, a son. He's maybe the biggest personal influence in my entire life. Fact. And he's a podcaster with a show he co-hosts, A Taste of Dragons. And very relevantly to here, he's a professional clown. Live from South Florida, it's Troy Davidson, a.k.a. Waffles the Clown.
What up, DJ BO? What up, Danny Fitz? So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, just like Danny said, we got a little graze on that hurricane. Isaiah just kind of like did a little nudge, but nothing too much. So, you know, we're doing well. We're grateful for that.
You guys have the hurricane. We're having a strong wind blow in my apartment, knocking over my amazing Jekyll Brothers flag. But it's okay. Maybe I'm getting it through the Zoom. That's how that works with science, right, Dan?
It's science.
Science. Troy, I've known since I was 3 years old. We were tap dancing guys. We were good buddies
Shiny
all
suits,
throughout.
Frosty the Snowman recitals.
Yeah. As I told Troy recently, just gushing about him, he's there is no me without Troy. I can't imagine my life without Troy Davidson. He's that important to who I am with tastes and personality and everything else. Maybe we'll get into some of that later, maybe not. But either way, very happy to have Troy here. And, he's doing a very successful podcast, and he's a great guy.
You know, Brian, you're all right.
Rock and roll.
You're a good guy.
And in fact, this is not a coincidence of when we're having Troy, Waffles the Clown, on the podcast. In fact, along with those other things, Mr. Troy Davidson, Waffles the Clown, has had experience as a voiceover artist. Correct, right, Troy?
That is correct.
And so I would want you to read something. Dan, can you send that to Troy?
Toss it my way.
This is all live. Yep.
In what way would you like me to read it? I get you options, man. What do you want?
I want something very. Give me some Paul Robeson, very senatorial, very big, very strong. You know, a proclamation.
Okay.
You ready?
A proclamation. Paul Robeson. Okay. All right.
Dan, did you send it to Troy?
No, I haven't because my computer's totally lagging. So we're just keeping everybody waiting with this. It's like, this is what happens when I have 30 windows open at the same time. But let's see if I can.
All right.
That's how he keeps it all together. You need all 30. I can't say too much. True story. Yes.
We'll get to that in a second while Dan does that.
I'll put the Paul Robeson on hold.
We'll put that on hold. Mr. Troy Donald Davidson.
Yeah, man.
What is your personal experience with the Insane CIown Posse before this podcast episode?
First introductions to ICP is probably through high school, some songs. I think you mentioned it, that like game show song, I believe, was probably my introduction as well.
It was hot on the radio in South Florida.
It was. But I would say I'm more familiar with Insane CIown Posse through like, I don't know, pop culture. I'm aware of the gathering. It's more like the not the butt of a joke, but usually like the end of a joke where it's like, oh yeah, I drank a lot. And next thing I know, I was at the gathering of the Juggalos, you know, like to explain how drunk you got. I think that's probably where I've used anything ICP related in my life, but I've never actually listened to a full album before this weekend. And yeah, and I am aware that of their like makeup and how they kind of their look.
Them as personalities.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. And did you have specific expectations before getting into this album? What did you think your experience was going to be like? I
was expecting to have some type of hip hop that was going to be somehow infused in the circus with some type of spectacle. So I do remember they have a pretty strong theme. So those expectations I went into feeling and expecting, but I didn't necessarily expect kind of the subject matter. I've never really gone too deep to listen to their lyrics previously. And so I definitely have a much larger understanding, at least what their earlier work is like.
Got it.
Out of it.
And Troy, in the Facebook group chat, can you please open that file and read what we have there?
In the Facebook group chat.
Yeah, there's too much stuff going
on.
Gotcha.
Okay. No problems. I can do that on my phone.
You can do that. While Troy is doing that, because I'm keeping this thing going, someone's got to keep this ship sailing across. Let's move just slightly ahead. Dan, for some gather patter. Dan, what's going on in the world of ICP?
It's not nearly as crazy as last time that we had an episode. Last time we had an episode, two big things had hit the news with them. The biggest one being that them going on Chris Hansen's video podcast of To Catch a Predator to call out the guy from, I can't even remember what the crunk core
Blood
band
on the
is.
Dance Floor?
Blood on the Dance Floor. He's calling out the Blood on the Dance Floor.
We talked about that. What's happening this time?
That makes sense. It's a Florida thing, man. Representing the FLA. But to that end, it was that. So compared to ICP going on to a show to call for their fans to literally beat up a guy, the only thing that happened is there was a really good piece. I haven't finished reading it yet. That came out on the Detroit news.com called A Full-Blown Juggalo Riot, revisiting the first gathering of the Juggalos 20 years later. So that came out on July 21st. And so we didn't cover that in our last episode, but that's probably the biggest thing. It's been kind of a slow week. I mean,
it's a dog days of summer. Yeah.
It's a dog days of summer, and it's hard to top calling for a massive beatdown of a predator. It's hard to top that.
And so, in our thriving social media commentary that goes on day and night with our podcast, people have asked us to turn more into the law, and I think we will be doing that very soon on episodes. We'll continue more in a sec. Troy, are you ready to read the proclamation?
Oh, I got a proclamation. All right. You want the whole thing?
You can just give maybe the first few paragraphs.
You got it. This is for National Clown Week, which is this week, the 1st through the 7th. By the President of the United States of America, which is 71. Is that Nixon?
You got it.
Nixon.
All right. Nixon talking about clowns.
I want a proclamation, Troy. Come on.
Whoever has heard the laughter of a child or seen sudden delight on the face of a lonely old man has understood in those brief moments mysteries deeper than love. All men are indebted to those who bring such moments of quiet splendor, who redeem sickness and pain with joy. All across America, good men in putty noses and baggy trousers, following a tradition as old as man's need to touch gently the lives of his fellow man, go into orphanages and children's hospitals, homes for the elderly and for the retarded, and give a part of themselves. Today, as always, clowns and the spirit they represent are as vital to the maintenance of our humanity as the builders and the growers and the governors. That's beautiful. Except for that
Right.
word, but
Did you know this was National Clown Week?
I did know it was National Clown Week. Thank you
Great.
for
Well,
recognizing
congratulations, Troy.
I did it. I can keep my
We
clown
celebrate
card.
you, Troy. Yeah. Do you know anything about the things they talked about, specifically going into children's hospitals and helping out people as a clown?
I do, as that is my profession.
Whoa! Can you tell us about since this is ICP? A clown posse, and you are a clown.
Yes,
Can you talk to us about being a professional clown?
Right. Sure, yeah. So what I do specifically is I work in children's hospitals, and my company, Healthy Humor, they work in children's hospitals and adult living centers. And we basically go and do rounds just like doctors. I didn't want to correct you earlier, but I'm not Waffles the Clown. My name is Dr. Waffles.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you. I didn't go and get my double doctorate for nothing, okay?
Dan, what did you just tell me before we started recording, Dan?
What, that I'm getting my PhD too?
Yeah.
So you're going to be the only one here with that. You're going to be the only one here without a doctorate, BO.
Got to be.
I'm starting
DJ
just my
BO.
master's degree in September. I'm lacking. I am lagging behind you guys. I really feel inadequate next to you guys. So I'm sorry for cutting you off, Dr. Waffles.
That's all right. That's all right. So I've been working in hospitals since 2011, and I'm a supervisor down in the South Florida section of my own posse of clowns, the South Florida team. And so I would say, as far as clowning is, as far as my experiences, I was trained by other hospital clowns. And these are clowns that either have worked directly in Ringling Brothers, clowns that have trained in France, clowns that are magicians, like from kind of all walks of life is kind of how I was trained. And so when it comes to, I guess, ICP and the relationship, I was utterly fascinated to see like what slant or what slice of clown they were going to fall into. And they are definitely in the more of the psychopathic, creepy clown, scary clown category of clowns, which is more of like a perverse stance on the white clown, which is like your standard full makeup and everything. We in the children's hospital do not do full makeup, do not do the white clown, probably because of the way that the creepy clowns have kind of taken ownership of that look. So instead, we go with the what they call a goose, which is like very light makeup. You see more of the person versus the makeup. The makeup is just an accent to highlight the features that you already have. ICP, the first thing you see is makeup.
Yes.
And to be honest, if I didn't already know them, or if I didn't even know their name and I saw them, I would probably think they were like more trying to do something about Kiss than clowns because they don't have what is traditional in like America now, like a red nose and like a floppy, they're not dressed like a clown, just they have the makeup, which is very black and white like Kiss does. But the look of what they have is very much, if you just painted it red and blue, it would be and put a nose on it, it would be your standard kind of clown look.
That's how I end every one of my business meetings. I say, put a nose on it.
Nose on it, little boot. I find them funny at times. I don't know if I'm catching a lot of like classic clown bits or if I'm missing some classic clown in their albums. But they definitely have the spirit of, I don't know, that there's a fun immaturity to it. And I think there's a fun immaturity to clowning, especially if you are the fool, if you are the number two, that I think that they kind of play with each other and in a sense, which if I really looked, I could kind of see some clown roots there. But to the most part, I really just kind of see they took the carnival, they took the makeup and kind of the penchant for zany wildness and base that into their craft.
Well, generally on this subject, I generally pity fools, but however it goes, that's fine. Let's talk about some of the pop culture that was happening in 1994. This album was released on March 8th, the day before, very much in relevancy, on March 7, 1994. There was a court case between Campbell versus Acuff Rose. Of course, this was decided on the Supreme Court. The Campbell in question is Luther Campbell, a.k.a. Uncle Luke of Two Live Crew, another guy based in Miami. And he did a parody of the song Pretty Woman, Oh Pretty Woman, by Roy Orbison. The Acuff Rose, that would be so Roy Acuff. And Acuff Rose was the biggest publishing music in country music and in popular music. Fred Rose was the business guy. And he, Two Live Crew did a parody of Oh Pretty Woman. And it was found that because it was a parody and he was using copyrighted material, but that was okay under fair use. They had to give credit to the original recording, but it was all a go. This album, The Ringmaster, does use some parody, which we might talk about later. On March 31st, later that month, Madonna goes on the David Letterman show and says, fuck, a bunch of times and kind of hits on David Letterman. We're kind of seeing a loosening of things in media. Things are going a little bit crazy. The next month, in April, Kurt Cobain kills himself. Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, of course. We're dealing with Kurt Cobain, who almost seems like a character in some of ICP songs in terms of feeling isolated and depression. And, of course, in June of '94, O.J. Simpson rides around in his white Bronco. Again, something that feels like it came from an ICP song. Maybe this stuff will come up later, but definitely in the zeitgeist at the time. Dan, albums from around that same period.
So 1994 was probably one of the greatest years in hip-hop as far as I can tell. Like, I was going through a list of albums that came out there. Brian is immediately like, look at that face. It was anything after 1978 is garbage.
That face of disdain.
No, you know what?
Wait.
You know what the disdain is? You're right. I think you've got the gestalt kind of wrong, though. Dan doesn't know shit about hip-hop. Get the fuck out of here. There is some good music that hip-hop that came out in '94. It was a little late in terms of the great stuff, but fine. Continue, Dan.
Fair enough. But let's say Vibe magazine, in an edition that came out last year for 2019, as the 25th anniversary of the year, said that was, for them, the best year of hip-hop ever. So let's see. Not only so to go with music that influenced what we're listening to today, A Tribe Called Quest at the tail end of '93 had just put out Midnight Marauders, which I feel like has definitely a bit of an impact on this. Then moving into 1994, here are some albums that came out in 1994 in hip hop: Beastie Boys' Ill Communication, Digable Planet's Blowout Comb. Now we're getting into the big commercial ones: Nas' Illmatic, Notorious B.I.G.'s Ready to Die, Method Man's Tycall. If you want to get into regional stuff, then you have Outkast representing the Tycall, yeah. So Outkast, Southern Playalistic, I can never even pronounce
Califragic music.
Yes, it's Southern Playlistic Cadillac music, Debrat Spunktified, and another couple Southern things representing FLA here. Songs that were a big part I heard everywhere in my childhood and elementary school. Luke's It's Your Birthday, and 69 Boys Tootsie Roll. If you guys remember those ones. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's not just it. There's so much more. Common's Resurrection came out, representing Chicago. Bones Thugs and Harmony put out an album that year. DJ Screw did his first big remix. So if you wanted to get into that kind of purple drank lean stuff.
This was a seminal year for an elementary school kid to get into hip-hop.
To get into hip-hop, dude.
Tootsie Roll contains the line, "No shame in the game. Gonna break it down like James." No shame in the game. That's where I stole that from.
Nice. 3-6 Mafia, then known as 666 Mafia, released their first mixtape. If we're starting to get into the horrorcore game, and Scarface's The Diary came out that year. So keeping with the kind of Ghetto Boys horrorcore thing. So, and then of course, as Brian reminded me beforehand, this is of course the first album. Also in 1994, the first Korn album came out. So. New metal, obviously metal and rap had come together plenty of times before, but that was the beginning of a wave that ICP definitely rode to the top of the charts many years later.
I don't think it's something they set out even to do, as we've talked about, but it's definitely something they connected with and was kind of grouped in together with.
Yeah, so 94, year in definitely a great year in hip hop. You mentioned Kurt Cobain. I won't go too much into other music, but Kurt Cobain's death was definitely a big one in that year too. But you covered a lot of good music ones.
Yeah. All right. We ready to talk about it.
OJ and Bone Thugs and Harmony. What a year.
Yep. What a year. We were 10 years old. Let's talk about the album. Let's get to the meat on the bone here. The second Joker's card, the Ringmaster. Let's start with you, Dan. What are your general feelings about this album?
So for the most part, the one sentence version of it is, I think it's better than Carnival of Carnage. It's definitely an ICP album in terms of it's
wait. Can you let me write this down? Is it definitely an ICP album?
It's definitely an ICP album.
Okay.
With regards to the fact that it's very hit and miss, but their hits are better on this album than it was with Carnival of Carnage. The songs where they succeeded, they're getting better at their craft. They're certainly. It's interesting because this is an album that went gold by the time it eventually, by the time the chips had fallen. But it's interesting because this is definitely one of their best-selling albums. But so far, I don't think it's going to be one of my favorites. But what do you got, Troy? What's your opinion on this so far? This being the only one you've listened to.
Just general vibes.
It's the best ICP album I've ever listened to. It's just number one right off the bat. They nailed it. I found it actually really fascinating. I knew that they were kind of a fun hip hop. The term horrorcore has kind of been floated around to me here and there. I found there was a lot of like experimental stuff in this that was definitely, I felt like they were trying some different sounds out. I dug a lot of their bass lines that they were putting out. I was definitely grooving with a lot of them, but generally I thought it was fun. I thought it was weird. But unfortunately, my stamina did not last throughout the whole thing.
So. I agree.
Exactly.
Do you have anything else you want to say about it generally?
That is generally my thoughts.
Okay, I agree with two. I agree with Troy. Troy. First of all, Troy's just a great guy. But I say that all day. I say that every day. I strongly agree with two key points that Troy made. Number one, I think the star of this album, and by the way, this is the first album with ICP as a duo. John Kickjazz he's been thrown aside, who is
he's been
two
kicked.
Dopes. Yeah, he's been kicked
to the curb.
He's left
kicked to the curb. There you go. Which is Two Dope. At the time, it was Two Dope or Shaggy Two Dope's brother. He's been kicked to the side. But the all-star of the album is not Two Dope. It's not Violent J. It's Mikey Clark, who definitely stepped up his game on the second album. There is a noticeable quality difference in the production here from the first album. He produces or co-produces every track on this album, whereas there's a couple on the first that he was not involved with. And it is certainly now a more eclectic and dynamic listening experience than the first one. He's definitely trying hard to pick up more obscure samples. It definitely sounds more cohesive. And in a way that I have some mixed feelings about that, and that some of the influences are less written on their sleeve. There's no more obvious like Prince samples like there was on the first album. Here it's like gong, But I think the all-star is definitely Mikey Clark. Some of the bass lines he uses and puts together are more interesting. And also the endurance issue is a big factor. Dan, like we talked about, the first album I thought was too long. I actually liked the major label version more that was put out, that cut out two of the songs, I think it was. This album is even longer. It's between 70 and 71 minutes. And boy, oh boy, we don't need to recap this, but certainly at that period, albums were stretching out their length to fit the CD format. 70 to 71 minutes of this, even with the more dynamic production, is much too long. I will give a shout out though to Two Dope, who has he's like the supporting actor who has improved his game as well. He definitely has improved, maybe to pick up for the lack of the voice of his brother as well. So he's definitely stepped up his game. He's definitely still not at Violent J's level. Violent J is still holding it down, fairly strong as the lead voice. But again, Mikey Clark is definitely the all-star for this album.
Definitely
I'll just
agree.
mention, and to agree with something you said, Dan, like they definitely furthered the Juggalo universe. We get more chickens. We get the ghetto zone, which is a key term in ICP lore as the code for the inner city. We get, I know Dan's favorite, talking about the testicles, the balls. We get the Fago, we get the net and stuff. We'll get into that as we break down some of the tracks. But definitely, you think that all sounds about right, Dan?
You pretty much, you pretty much kind of captured it. So, like you said, the production value and the samples were just really good on this. And I think, like you said, it kind of, so I'll go on to some of my kind of the pros that I had for there. Some of the specific songs, I think that Southwest song they're finally getting to the point where they used this great meters bass line that really took it up. It's a little bit Dust Brothers. They're throwing a little. They clearly on their first album, and definitely some on this album, definitely have a Beastie Boys vibe going to them that they're channeling a little bit. Here a little bit more where they're actually trading verses with some regularity, or rather trading within a verse, or actually bouncing off each other a little bit. But to that end, Southwest, and they're finally getting to the point now where they're having really good sing-along choruses, like good concert-ready choruses. Everybody's singing that Southwest song, the whole the oh-yo kind of thing that they have going in the chorus.
Well, since you're bringing it up now, I'll just say I think that's the best song on the album, the Southwest song.
Yeah,
would you agree, Trey?
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with that.
Yeah. I like your style. No, but that's one of the pros I would definitely say to that. One of the ones that actually kind of surprised me, the first time I heard it, I was really thrown off by it, was the Dead one. What are your guys' feelings on the Dead one?
I was actually for it.
Yeah,
because it came in a part where I think halfway through the album, things were just kind of mushing together, and the Dead one came in, and it was stark, and it was mostly spoken, and it was unsettling, and I found it interesting. So I was all right with that. I don't have any reference to what it sounds like because I'm not as good at music as you all, but I'm sure it sounds like something in the music universe.
I liked it in the context of the album. I have some issues with the sequencing of this album, but that did help out because it definitely slowed it down. But my problem with that song is we're starting to recognize now the types of songs ICP does. They're definitely going into categories. I think Dan's nodding right now. He agrees with me. The Dead one, though, to me, was not as good as the similar song on the first album, which I liked a lot more, which is Guts on the Ceiling. So it's the sort of atmospheric horror song. But to me, it just lacked the subtlety of Guts on the Ceiling. What do you think, Dan?
So for me, this was, I think, one of the strongest songs of theirs lyrically. On an album where lyrically they didn't really, it's really hit and miss on this one. And where the songs, there's a lot of them that ran together. This one was interesting because the theme of it is essentially that it's in that quick time between the fact that he's fatally shot, and he actually dies, and he's kind of realizing it slowly. And the voice in his head and voices from outside are kind of like, he's like, nah, this is not happening. And no, this is happening. And it has this kind of funky, almost dub vibe to it. Definitely a little bit psychedelic, which was really kind of like a dark psychedelic feel to it that I really liked. And so, and then as you listen to the lyrics more, you're like, whoa, this is kind of different from theirs. Because usually almost all of their tracks are basically like, hey, we're going to go out there and murder people. And so it's definitely like from the perspective of somebody who got murdered.
Yeah. I'm the one being murdered. How novel.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, they did go into that a bit on the first album as well. They definitely have some masochistic.
But Brian, you think that this was not a step forward in that direction of them kind of going there with this style?
For that track, no. I really prefer Guts on the Ceiling from the first album. You just have to listen to it. I would say that Let me give a general vibe thing with Dan. Dan said this album is better than the first album, and whereas I recognize some of the sonic improvements and issues with it, maybe it's just because I listened to the first album first. I like the first album first more. It just felt like it had more energy to it, and the songs were just more fresh in a sense. Whereas here, Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope didn't really step up their game to Mikey Clark, and it felt like disjointed in that sense. So I actually prefer the first album, and I see this as kind of being part of it, where Violent J didn't really pick it up to match the production, so I prefer the version of this type of song on the first one.
Fair enough. So that brings me to an interesting thing, talking about different versions of songs, is this was the first of several recorded versions of Chicken Huntin', which is another one of the singles for this album, which of course, for those of you watching and listening who don't know, is that this was recorded first on this album as a much more straightforward hip-hop track, and then recorded for their next album. Was it Riddlebox that they recorded it for as well? I'll have to double check. They recorded another version of it. The story essentially goes is that they joined a record label. The record label made a remix of it. They hated the remix of it. Then they made their own remix and released it on a subsequent album. And they made music videos for both. The original music video for Chicken Huntin', the hip-hop version, was actually scrapped and not released, and they released it eventually on they released it much later, and it's a very good and very interesting video. And then they released a much more like polished kind of new metal-y version one later that is a much higher production value, very different sound, very big everything. But this is the first of, I believe, the first recorded versions of Chicken Huntin'. And again,
song. Let's talk about Chicken Huntin'. There's a couple aspects to talk about. First of all, it seems to be, and again, Dan and I'm a little bit more than Dan. We're not super well versed in the Juggalo universe, but it seems by all indication from the re-recording to some of their set lists to be the hit from the album, at least in the Juggalo universe.
It's catchy. It is a
catchy
song.
Yeah. And I didn't think it was that great. I mean, it's a theme, going back to the theme, and there's a couple things to talk about here. So, first of all, as Dan talked about in our first episode, we're getting back to something that's very relevant again in 2020, which is their anti-Southern Confederate attitudes, which are very strong there. That had surprised Dan for the first album. Troy, were you expecting an anti-Confederate sort of attitude from ICP?
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
There you go.
I wasn't expecting to be like leaning the other way or anything. I just didn't know that they would have a hard stance on this. Maybe too hard. I don't know.
Well, yeah. It does feel very relevant for 2020, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely in the zeitgeist of it's what's in the air. But what's funny about that song is I didn't even realize it till about halfway through, because I'm hearing the lyrics. I'm not, I'm not like writing them down, but I don't know if it's a metaphor. But then I'm like, oh, when they're saying redneck, they mean rednecks, okay? Yeah. As they're going through it. But then by the end of the song, I had forgotten it all because I'm just calling responsive. I'm just with them chanting. Are you going chicken hunting? Yeah, I'm going chicken hunting. Like, it's just so much fun. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't know. Yeah. I thought it was fun.
I just found it kind of plotting a bit. I like the mandolin break in the middle of it. Sure. I thought that was cute. I don't know. We can talk about the relevancy here. But Dan, I think you have a song sample. I don't know if you know this, Troy. You should hold on to something there in Florida. Maybe you've had experience from the hurricane.
Yeah.
Dan, too. We are about to go into a black hole of DJ BO-ness. Are you ready? We're about to go deep into a black hole. You ready, Dan? You got the sound clip? Ready?
Which one do you want me to play?
The one that says chicken on, you idiot.
Okay, here we go.
Well, I'm heading down the southern trail, going chicken hunting, chopping redneck chickens, and I ain't seen nothing. The redneck stuck my barrel in his eye. Boom shaka, hair jumps in the sky. Why? I never liked chicken pot pie or chopped chicken on rye. So tell Billy Bob gonna cut his neck up. Slice, poke, chop, stab, cut. So Oh, what do you do with the drunken hillbilly? Cut his fucking eyes out, feed him to his Aunt Nellie. Willy, willy, chicken nugget, gotta love it. Hit him with the 12-gauge bucket. Chicken nuggets laid out all over the grass, and the little hound dog will eat him up fast. Last as long as you can, my man.
So yeah, wow, BO.
Think about this for a second. That was performed. That was performed by Clownvis, who is a Elvis clown performer. So we have Elvis-ness, Americana parody of ICP sitting around talking about it. That's basically we're sinking deep into everything that is me here, and we might just pull the rest of the universe in with it here.
When did when was that song made that you just
That
played?
was made this year on Clownvis's video podcast.
Okay.
Clownvis, he dresses as an Elvis clown and performs parodies and original material and covers like that. And he has opened for ICP. He has performed at the Gathering, I believe. Was scheduled to be there this year too. I was looking very much forward to seeing him. And so he had Violent J on his podcast, and to kind of give a tribute to that, he performed his own version of Chicken Huntin'.
Very good stuff.
I like it.
Very good stuff.
It's Elvis, it's sitting around, it's Americana, it's everything that's I like in this universe.
Well, exactly. That's touche. And what's interesting about them is they have songs that will. Oh, I'm trying to remember which song it was, where they actually sampled Hank Williams, and I gotta look up.
The Hank Williams sample is in the background. You can hear
you can recognize it, but like they sample. Yeah, they definitely is like, you're throwing Hank Williams in there as well. But they in this album, some of the samples that they gave were you talked about Gong, which was kind of a more obscure one, but they have a small part of Nobody's Fault by Aerosmith. They have the bass line for Bullet in the Head by Rage Against the Machine, so getting that. Right On for the Darkness in Southwest Song, which is a little bit more of a subtle sample. The Meters one that we were talking about. And one of my favorite weird ones, very small track from Fess Parker, Ringle Wrangle, 1955. Sped up, never heard of it, but here we'll play a little track, a little bit of that too.
On my boots and I don't give a hoot, 'cause I got me a pretty woman's love.
Okay, and I cut it off before they start who saying what they meant. But it was just like a cute little I got me a pretty woman's love. It was like, and it's just cute little 50s kind of cowboy track.
It really depends, and this is something I've mentioned before, on whether you count Mike E. Clark as part of ICP. And there's a big divide between having the producer and the members of ICP in terms of the source material, where sometimes hip-hop artists will connect to the original source material. Sometimes it's just a sonic thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? I don't think sometimes it really matters. I don't.
It's not that they're always like paying homage or that it's a big influence. They just like the sound and it would work.
It was just something they found. They picked it up on an album, and that's it.
Yep.
So sometimes it's one,
never know
the other.
So Troy, what are some of your other pros of the album? Because we BO and I bloviate quite a bit. What are some of your other pros or favorite songs or favorite aspects of the album?
I would say right from the start, I was happy that the Insane Clown Posse was making a album that took place in a carnival with a ringmaster. Like, just having that theme, it colored my imagination. I was ready for the weird. So I thought just right off the bat with the Wax Museum, I thought it was fun, and I was kind of on board to just go with it. And the first song, jumping into it, Murder Go Round, that's hilarious to me. It's absurd. It's violent. It's also like a party anthem at parts. It feels like, and I don't know. That first song kind of really, I guess, got me into the right mindset. That really kind of carried me through the next 8 or the next maybe 7 tracks, and I felt that there was a nice theme that kind of connected them. I don't know exactly what the theme means. From what I understand, it's part of a big, larger picture that I didn't go too much into.
Joker cards, yeah.
You're right,
yeah.
I was feeling a theme, and I was actually pretty impressed about that, given that it's their second album, and they're what, like 20 now or something?
Yeah. So here's one of the interesting things, and so I was reading up on this album a little bit, and to your point and what you're getting at is really interesting that the Joker's cards started becoming a big deal at this point. In the first album, they didn't really touch on the theme of the Joker cards, but at this point, they started realizing, like, we have these kind of overarching concepts within the albums, and started writing to those concepts. And so the Ringmaster was essentially a metaphor for the Ringmaster is created through one's own sins, and is one of several who will end up judging whether a soul is worthy to enter heaven or is doomed to eternal hell. So
I applaud the audacity to try and make this overarching, like, that is cool. Whether or not the album is great or not, like, I think that's pretty novel.
Audacious is absolutely right.
Yeah.
And yeah, they even, like, they did a comic book that they wrote and drew themselves. Shaggy 2 Dope is an artist. He does their album covers, and Violent J wrote it. Like, they are serious business. I mean, the amount of output and the diversity of it is for sure. And they even mentioned that. I think it mentions in Wax Museum that these are your own sins reflected back at you. And it's mentioned a couple other times in the album as well.
Yeah, it's a strong thematic thing that they kind of realize, like, wait a sec, we can chain this together to make something interesting. And if you actually open up the CD version of this, could deep dive into the internet for YouTube stuff about this, is where a dude had the CD version of it. First of all, there were misprints in the first CD edition, so that one's a little harder to come by. But the second re-releases of it several years later that this guy had and reviewed showed the inside. And in the side of it, it actually talks about the fact that this is the second of the Joker cards, which is a 6-card, essentially a 6-part kind of set of themes across their first 6 albums. And it says at the bottom of it, kind of ominously, after all 6 have risen, the end will consume us all.
Yes.
That's some comic book shit right there. Like, that's great. You get the whole story. You got to collect them all to get the full picture. Oh, that's cool. Did it pay off?
Well, yes.
They created a second Joker's set of Joker's cards. So
after the Miracles was the end of the first Joker's card. You remember magnets? And then I'm talking about,
I think,
heaven.
magnets. How do they work?
Miracle? Yes. The end of it is it's heaven. They talked about God.
Oh, I do remember someone saying that and being like, "Oh, it was about God the whole time," or something like that.
Yeah.
It's definitely
now they have a second. Now they have a second deck.
Yeah, they have a second. So definitely interesting. Thematically, they're like, whoa. It's like Kiss, harkening back to your Kiss thing, where they're creating a world of merchandise and items and bringing it all together, this ethos to go with it. That's their style, man. It's huge. And they get a lot of buy-in and a lot of big fans.
So I felt a lot of that in this album. I don't know if I didn't get the vibe that the first one was exactly all that, but I definitely feel that there's more of a direction in what they're trying to do with the overall picture, and I appreciated that.
Yeah. Well, to that end, they're definitely, like you said, there's this whole Juggalo vocabulary that goes on. This is an album where they start dropping more and more of that. For instance, one of the themes that pops up in their first album, or pops up as a result of their first album, which I'll get to, is the number 17. Did you catch that, BO? How that popped up? What's your take on that? What's that?
Yeah, they mentioned 17 dead people, right?
Yeah. So twice on the album, they talk about 17 dead people on the song Wagon Wagon and in the song My Fun House. And this harkens back to the previous album, an EP which we didn't cover called Beverly Kills 50187, where there's a song called 17 Dead. And if you go into the blogiverse of the Juggalo, or the blog world of the Juggalo-verse, you'll find out that one of the reasons that they picked this is there's a possibly apocryphal story about how on the first day that Carnival of Carnage was released, they sold 17 copies of it.
Oh.
And so that is a number that is meaningful to them. It's kind of like, look,
I didn't
our
even
first
look that
albums
up.
are
I
gold
just
now.
noticed that. I didn't even notice that. I just noticed that they mentioned 17. Oh.
And I had to look at it. I was like, what is this? And so they have a lot of these little Easter eggs embedded in there. In addition to having, like you said, their own vocabulary. Nedin, as we were talking about, what's Brian, what was your you were talking about that earlier. You were talking about Nedin. What's Nedin?
Well, we can bring that up in a second. Let me loop that into what I was going to say. Let's talk about Bugs on My Nuts.
Bugs on My Nugs.
That was near the very end. I have a couple issues with that song. Well, first of all, netting is their word for getting laid. It's the word for vagina or pussy or whatever, like sort of thing. But especially bugs on my nugs. Dan, you are a bugs guy.
That's right.
Also, you were really detested them talking about their private parts. I'm interested in your take on aspects of this song, and I also want to bring up one special aspect of this song as well. But please, I want to hear your take, Dan. Were you uncomfortable with them talking about their balls?
I have in bold and italicized in my notes, entomologist gotta love this track.
I was not planned. Ladies and gentlemen, was not planned. I knew
not planned.
Would have a connection.
Definitely one of, I don't know whether to call this a pro or a con. So for those of you, as you can imagine here, the song, Bugs in My Nugs, Z's at the end of Bugs and Nugs, is a song written from the perspective of a man's sexually transmitted critters.
Yeah.
So did you send me a sample for this one, or should I just do a dramatic interpretation of it? Your nuts. Go ahead.
No, you talk about it, and then I want to talk about something I noticed from that track.
Okay, so I mean, there's some. So it's 3+ minutes dedicated to the crabs/scabies on this man's nuts, saying, "Your nuts, we want your nuts. We'll itch and scratch and bite your nuts. Your nuts, we want your nuts. Oh please, oh please, fuck dirty butts." And it's just basically a song entirely dedicated to, I want you to have sex with dirty women and to continue transmitting these back and forth. And it's, wow. When I first heard that, I thought, this is peak ICP trolling silliness right here. I mean, where else are you going to get phrases like, I got bizugs on my sizznack, and I can't be having centipedes on my dick, man. Like, this is a first. I think I can't say I'm well-versed in pre-1990s hip-hop, but I have a feeling that this is the first song said from the perspective of a man's crabs.
He's
I think there's a Biz Marquee song. I'm gonna look that up. I'm gonna look that up in my personal music collection right now. What I noticed from this song that made me realize that I wanted to play for you is, I think the biggest influence on the group at this time that I noticed directly, especially in the song, not necessarily lyrical content, but wordplay and production. I think Mikey Clark and Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope, or 2 Dope at this point, were listening to another group based in Los Angeles. So Dan, can you play the ICP clip from this song?
So you wanna fuck around, always gotta buck around. Lift up your ding-a-ling, nothing but a bug you found. Now they call you funky nuts, cause you like funky butts. Scratching and biting them, then they call you monkey nuts. But I ain't saying that, cause you ain't playing that. Bring the track back and I get back to the nutsack track.
Okay, now play the song that I think where you can hear directly their influence to the point where I think they really kind of bit from.
Now you're in a stiff block, hanging off the bench jock. They call me Pimp Pop, specialized in hip hop. Cause I'm down with Cypress, still is where I might begin to take the girl. If you she's the flyer than the other broad, hooking off the fish rod. Isn't that odd? Instead of say my dick's hard, it's not about knocking you. Do you feel like clocking loose?
Some hard biting. That's some hard biting there.
You kind of stepped on it, but when they change up the bass line, there's the break, and then the next rapper comes in. They use it as an opportunity to switch rappers. That song is from Cypress Hill, I think, and the song is the Funky Feel one. And I think they took a giant influence from what Cypress Hill was doing right around the same time, but actually like a year or two before. On this album, I think you have to look a lot to Cypress Hill's early work.
Fair point, fair point.
I turned off by the time that song came on.
It is track like 14 at that point.
It's not that I turned off entirely, but I think at that point for me, like the charminess of being like that asshole kid was worn off for me, and just talking about like balls and tits and stuff, and was like, I get it. All right, cool. I kind of wish that I had a more bug tie-in because I feel like I probably would have enjoyed it more.
It took me right back up. I'm like, I'm bought back in here, man. They picked the most niche of niche audiences, entomologists who are fans of ICP. I am a niche of 5.
The tracks 12 is The Loons, track 13 is Love Song, track 14 is Bugs on My Nugs, and it's basically generally relationship women songs, and it's too much all grouped together.
Love Song really disappointed me. Because I loved the sound of it because it did sound so
it should have been
different.
half the length. Half the length.
But also, and I know I'm looking back from 2020 eyes, but I just can't get the context of that song. Like I try to be like, no, it's fine, but like I just can't. It just bums me out.
It's very Two Live Crew-ish, as we talked about.
Sure.
Yeah, it's very it's tough. I agree, and I like the sonic difference of the album, but like we talked about for the first album, some of each of the songs could easily be a minute less. They also do something that's really annoying as well, just as a listener. This especially brings me back to when I was listening on CDs or when I listened to it on tracks. They put the skits in with the songs, which means if I want to re-listen to a song, I got to listen through the skits, which is just an annoying habit.
Come on. They worked hard on them.
It's thematic, man. It ties into the...
But make them separate tracks.
Fair point.
You call yourself a real ICP fan.
Okay. One thing we really got to get to, because I think we're really running low on time here, and we got to mention this. This is awkward, but I know I can say anything with these guys anyway. Mm-hmm. And then, well, there's so many things. Mr. Johnson's head. Let's talk about Mr. Johnson's head for just a second.
I went on a journey.
Okay. I want you to play a clip from that, and then Troy, I'm going to ask you some tough questions, so get ready.
Okay.
But I'd be dying fast, cause I'd rather learn about a redneck checker who owned a couple slaves, but I guess it doesn't matter. Fuck Washington, Benjamin, buck them all out. They can suck my nuts till they wooden teeth fall out. And I guess, but I...
Okay. Troy, this is... You, I want to talk about a couple different things here. First of all, the choice of the lyric, because they'd rather learn about redneck chukka. They're definitely implying a word there very strongly, I think, because I could find no other reference to it. I think they're kind of combining the word chicken with a special N-word, which I said last time to piss people off. And also, they talked about essentially 2020 cancel culture here. Fuck Washington, Benjamin, fuck them all out.
Yeah.
Talking about taking down statues here in 2020. Yeah. Troy, this is an intersectional podcast.
Yeah.
You are a half West Indian, half African American man here in 2020. You have an intersectional interest in even just being an American here and talking about these things.
This
is much too big of a topic to ask you, but I'm going to ask you anyway because I can and I have a microphone. This is my show. Troy, please break all that down for me in 4 minutes. Go.
The song by itself has even more than that to it because we're also talking about school violence. So when I was the journey that I went on with the song was definitely the first. I was just like, oh man, I'm really uncomfortable. It wasn't about the race stuff. It was about the idea of like a kid murdering people at a school or murdering his teacher, which has happened in Florida not like 2 years ago. So like that made me really uncomfortable. But then as you hear the song and he's talking about because his teacher had a rebel flag up and was very racist, that he was doing it. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm kind of okay with that. And so I kind of balanced out the racism or the anti-racism started balancing out the school violence for me in a weird way. And, well, just as far as like, this makes me uncomfortable, but I kind of like what this is. So here we are. I can continue to listen to the song. And then, but then I think I enjoyed the lyrics of it too. I like the fact that he was calling out, presidential figures that are heroes, which is very much what we're talking about. Even the last John Oliver episode was specifically about this, you know? Yes, that part is fine as far as it's getting behind it. But in the end, I'm not behind it. Like in the end, I am not for, absurd amount of violence, including murder and death, encouragement of that for one's views.
But I think it's definitely fantastic in its perspective.
I think it's fantastic that they show their hard stance. I think it's great expression. It's great to as far as their expression of it. And I think it encapsulates an anger, especially as someone who is nerdy or someone who doesn't have a big voice or a big platform, that they will secretly get justice to be done. But ultimately, as far as the song is concerned, it's fine. But ultimately, in the real world, there are much better ways to find justice.
Sure. I mean, I think it's really expressing the isolation things. And Dan, you loved the story songs in the first album. This is really the only story song, I think, on this album.
And that's what I was going to get, is that this is one of the few story songs. And for me, it is interesting because it totally is one of those songs that didn't age well. Troy kind of gets to that, is that this was really before, this was 5 years before Columbine.
This is Jeremy time we talked about.
Yeah. So this is really an era where they're poking. It's I don't want to say progressive, but they're definitely ahead of what was kind of in the zeitgeist at the time. And like you said, that doesn't. I mean, there's other aspects like of certain word use that didn't age well. They definitely one anti kind of a homophobic.
They say faggot
slur.
at a point. Yeah.
Oh,
They definitely the women violence thing. It's one of those where it's like, where do you draw the line at like, well, we're talking about school violence now. Well, we're talking about violence against women. Like you said, going back to kind of one of my cons of the album is that also you talked about love song. I loved the sample that they had for that. Mm-hmm. The lyrics were like, as from a not like the flow of it wasn't very good and the lyrics were pretty bad. And then there was the misogyny stacked on top of that. And I'm just like, what's interesting is that since then they've kind of apologized for their earlier stuff. They have gotten to the point where they said, we said a lot of things that were homophobic, and we definitely want to be as inclusive as we can be, and we are feel bad for the kind of stuff we did when we were 20.
I heard that they even mentioned that some of the more outrageous things they said was just to get people to listen to a bigger topic, to kind of shock people or just talk, to relate and then hit you with it. That song did have one of my favorite lyrics, though. I know it's corny, but I think it's in that song he says, "My mind is my prison and my brain is my cell." I know it's just fun wordplay, but I really enjoyed that.
Let's just continue on from that. We really got to rush through this. There's just so much. We haven't even really talked. We can do another hour on just this album.
Break it into
which is fantastic. My favorite lyric is from the Southwest song, and I just lost it on my things here. Is from the Southwest song. And in it, they say, I'll tell you in a second. Here we go. I feel him in the corner of a circled room at about 13 in the afternoon. And then I see a strain as I walk along. I notice everybody singing the Southwest song. I like the sort of misstep, the skip of corner of a circled room at 13 in the afternoon. I thought it was clever. Dan, favorite lyric?
Southwest song. That's where the first time that they get serious. I wait for night to fall, and then I walk outside, and then I run back in because I don't want to die. You see, the air alone, it can corrupt your brain. As smoke fills the sky, enough to block the rain. I was like, all right.
The imagery of smog in Detroit has a great historical significance and stuff. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Dan, do you have a least favorite lyric?
It's basically all of Love Song. Let's just stick with all of Love Song. Like, there's a lot of moments I feel the major con of this album is a lot of these songs could have been A, cut down a minute, like you said, but B, a lot of very interchangeable songs where they basically just kind of had the same meter and a very simple beat underneath of it that it's like these songs really could have been, but like you said, it's filling out the album. They didn't need 16 tracks. There's a lot of interchanging songs, and honestly, they're not up to their snuff as lyricists yet, And that some of these songs are just like, wow, that was just bad lyrics.
With the divide of the production stepping up, that disconnect really hurt me. In the Loons, another Yeah, he said. They say I can see him standing at the end of the block because somebody's clock is running out of talk. She slipped through the cracks in the wall of the eve. All is justified as every punishment received. It's kind of word salad.
Yeah.
Clock running out of talk. I can't do it.
Yeah.
Good wordplay.
Dan, how many hatchets out of 5?
On a 1 to 5 hatchet scale, I'm going to give this 2 hatchets. So Carnival of Carnage got 1.5. I'm giving this 2 hatchets. The hits hit harder. It drags, just like the last album. It's a lot of the same issues that the last album was plagued by. But like you said, the samples are getting better. The best songs are getting better. They're getting big. They're getting bigger in scope and in their ability to write pop songs. I'm still only calling it a 2 out of 5 hatchets, though.
Troy, hatchets.
I am right there with the 2 out of 5 hatchets. It's fun. I think it's interesting, but I think the lyrics is what kills it for me. The misogynistic violence and stuff, I can't get past it, and like half of the album is that to me.
Yeah.
And so I just 2, but it's got a good bass line. It's got a lot of good bass lines.
Put a nose on it. I give this a half step down from the first album. It's
You
2.
do halves?
The first. What's that?
Sorry.
I give it 1 hatchet out of 5.
Ooh.
Half
Okay.
step down. I give it a half hatchet down. The first album was too long. This is even longer. The disconnect between the production and the music, the repetition of the relation, that 3-song relationship block at the end is a killer to get through after you've already been through it a lot. You only really have one other voice on the album with capital E doing a verse. They
Great
give
verse,
credit
too.
to Jump Steady. Yes, he's a big thing, but it's too far at the end. The sequencing of the album is really tough. I really like the very last track on the album, which is the Ringmaster's worId. But why is it the last song on the album when it's an interesting disconnect? It should have been in the middle. So there's too many problems. I give it a half step down. I give it 1. Dan, what's the relationship between this album and the Decemberists?
I mean, there's some better Decemberist albums. There are some worse Decemberist albums. We'll say it that way.
Could I spin this? I could spin the Southwest song at a party. I could slip it in at a summer barbecue. And at a Halloween party, I could throw in the Ringmaster's worId. And although the Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope aren't on that at all. Dan, if you were to adapt this album or part of this into another genre, what would you say?
Adapt or die.
So adapt or die.
Very
So
good.
so here's kind of what I thought is that Freaks and Geeks, if it were directed by David Lynch, is the idea that, you know, you always think back in the 90s, I mean, you think the Saved by the Bell, high school, you know, you got your cliques of your nerds, you got your popular kids, everybody's looking cool. But I kind of like the idea of this weird, like, you kind of forget him in the background. The character is just in the background of this, like, David Lynch directed high school nerd kind of drama. But then it's like, there's this really effing weird guy in the background of this that ends up, and it tells the story. It's like a movie or a TV show that tells the story of this kid, but it's kind of in the background of this like typical popular high school, like Freaks and Geeks, Degrassi, Saved by the Bell kind of vibe. Because David Lynch kind of captures that whole like pitting the mundane and the really kind of like almost goofy over the top with like the horrible, which I guess ICP really only engages in the second half of that. So that's what I thought. Freaks and Geeks, directed by David Lynch, adaptation of Mr. Johnson's Head.
I also agree.
Mr. Johnson's Head.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Johnson said I zoomed in on that. I think it's an improvement for their story songs. I imagine a version of Mr. Johnson's Head. It's 2020, a hip Generation Z, whatever the fuck we're at, picks up a random CD player with CDs. Like it's like a vintage thing, something the other people don't know. And he picks up the ICP album and he listens to this song. And it's very much like Pennies from Heaven, the Steve Martin movie. American Psycho might be a more well-known reference, where it's the mundane, exactly, but this CD and this vintage thing with ICP puts him into this other universe, and things start blurring in between this other universe. with his vintage CD of the Insane Clown Posse and 2020 mundane middle school, high school life.
Did you warn Troy that we were going to be doing this?
I'm ready.
Look at him. Troy, this is Troy Davis. This is
throw
Dr.
you in the
Waffles.
deep end of the pool. What you got? What you got as your adaptation?
I'm going to do a little spin. I'm going to adapt this to video games because that's where my jam is. I would probably start with like a mid-90s Mortal Kombat, just when it comes to the violence, and also it's depiction of women. They're all in like thongs and they're huge breasts. And I would kind of start there with like, hey, we're just frustrated, horny kids making stuff. But then I would slap like a Parappa the Rapper on top of it. It's like fun. It's kind of colorful. It's got a nice theme to it. But right underneath it is just the blood and the guts.
Absolutely.
Touche. I like it. Especially on cue. Like, what do you got? He's like, ready to ride. Good call. I appreciate that, Troy.
Fantastic. Clown College. Dan, what did we learn?
What I learned is that they are at least trying love songs out. Because in the Joker's cards, they ostensibly start writing one love song for the last 5 of the Joker cards. And ostensibly, Love Song, the smoky bossa nova jazz sample that we talked about earlier, Maligned, is at least them attempting it. They got love in their hearts. That's what I learned on this album today. Somewhere, maybe.
That's better than mine. Like, I really just wanted to say the jump in production for Mikey Clark, but yours is much better than mine. I mean, like, seeing their development for the first time was what the biggest thing that I picked up from it. But I think yours was much more keen. Troy, what did you learn?
Yes, I would say same as everyone else who's heard their first album. I definitely learned that they have a hard stance against the Confederacy and people who follow it. That is probably the one thing everyone walks away the first time being like, oh, this is a big part of what they do. So that was something I learned from this album.
All right, we are just about finished here. We need to thank different people here. We need to thank Jillian Logue for our logo, another Florida person. Troy, do you have some plugs that you can tell the people? Where can they find you?
Hell yeah. My name is Troy Davidson. You can check my podcast out at Taste of Dragons Gaming Podcast. I do it with my wife and another couple, and we talk about games. We also go deep into the industry and talk about the people behind the games, the directors of Super Mario Brothers and Tetris, and the stories behind the stories that we get through gaming. So check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play as well. We're on Twitter and Instagram, and we just started streaming on Twitch. You can find us under Taste of Dragons Gaming Podcast.
Yeah, and ICP did have a role in a backyard wrestling video game. Mm-hmm. I think there was a couple online ones. Maybe we'll have to talk about those in future episodes. Because Troy, you're a great guest. Great person. Maybe we'll need to connect to those things. Dan, plugs.
Well, first of all, let me plug aspects of this show. So if you do want to get in touch with us, we do have a Gmail account, Road to Shangri-La Pod @gmail.com. We got a Mixcloud where you can listen to this. That's the one with the Road to Shangri-La Pod. We have an Instagram, Road to Shangri-La Pod. And of course, we got a YouTube channel, Road to Shangri-La Pod. I personally got to plug my Roti Instagram. So if you go to instagram.com/Grenada Rotis, you can read about my mission to try every single roti, which is like kind of like a West Indian burrito. I got to try every single roti on this island, give it a 0 to 25 rating, and talk about how awesome it is, because it's the best food in the universe.
When you're done with Grenada, come over to my mom's house. She's got the best roti.
Yeah, it's just and game over.
I endorse that.
Touche.
I endorse that. That was my first experiences with roti, for sure.
Right on. You got anything, Brian?
For me, I don't know. Check out if you're in China or Shanghai, check out Toe Jam, TOUJAM. If you're interested in Mongolian culture, check out Artger, ARTGER. Just hit me up on Facebook, Brian Offenter. I don't know. I'm tired. I think we're good. Thank you so much, guys. Good job. At our next episode, we will be talking about the ICP on the Hansen. What's his name, Dan?
What's that?
We'll be talking about
Chris
ICP.
Hansen. We're talking about ICP on Chris Hansen.
We'll be talking about ICP and the law. So watch their episode of on Chris Hansen's podcast. We'll be talking about that and some other aspects of ICP and the law. So please follow along with us. And thank you very much once again, Dr. Waffles, Troy, future Dr. Dan. And that's it for me, DJ BO, saying Dara Otsi.
The end.